The fluorescent lights hummed in the empty corridor of Naval Air Station Oceana at 400 hours. Rear Admiral Marcus Keller walked with purpose, his polished shoes clicking against the waxed floor, reviewing the day's flight roster on his tablet. The base was preparing for Operation Windfall, a critical NATO exercise that would test carrier strike group coordination across 3 oceans. He barely registered the figure pushing a mop bucket near the ready room until he almost collided with it. "Watch it," Keller said, not unkindly, stepping aside. The janitor was slight, maybe 5'6", wearing oversized coveralls with the name Martinez stitched crookedly above the breast pocket. A graying ponytail escaped from beneath a worn baseball cap. She didn't look up, just kept methodically cleaning the already spotless floor. Keller paused, something nagging at him. There were civilians on base, sure, but something about her movements, the economy of motion, the deliberate efficiency, struck him as oddly familiar. He glanced at his watch. The Air Wing commanders wouldn't arrive for another hour. On impulse, maybe boredom, maybe the peculiar stillness of the pre-dawn moment, he spoke. "You prior service." It was conversational, mildly curious. The janitor's hand stilled on the mop handle. A beat of silence stretched between them. "Long time ago, sir." Her voice was quiet, neutral, carrying the practiced dismissiveness of someone who'd learned to make herself invisible. Keller smiled, the patronizing expression of a flag officer making small talk with the help. "Yeah, what branch?" "Navy." "Rate?" "Aviation." Now he was mildly interested despite himself. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. The tablet dangled from one hand. "Let me guess, maintenance. Supply." He was already picturing the typical story. Someone who'd done a tour or two, maybe got out when family obligations called, ended up in janitorial services because it was steady work near a base. Martinez resumed mopping, her face still angled downward. "Pilot." Keller's smile widened into something approaching amusement. "Sure. And he was secretly an astronaut. He'd been in the Navy for 28 years, commanded carrier air wings, served on the Joint Chiefs Staff. He knew every female naval aviator of note from the past 3 decades. There weren't that many, especially not in her apparent age bracket, mid-50s, maybe pushing 60. "Really?" he said, his tone now openly skeptical, the way you'd humor a child claiming to be a superhero. "What you fly?" "Hornets, later Super Hornets." The Admiral actually laughed, a short bark that echoed in the empty hallway. Fighter pilots didn't end up pushing mops. They transitioned to airlines, defense contractors, or stayed in and made rank. This woman was clearly spinning tailies. "All right," he said, deciding to play along. "The pre-flight brief could wait. What was your call sign?" Martinez finally looked up. Her eyes were gray, hard as winter steel, and something in them made Keller's amusement catch in his throat. "Lone Eagle." The tablet slipped from Admiral Keller's fingers and clattered against the linoleum floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the sudden, suffocating silence. His face had gone pale, bloodless, as if he'd seen a ghost materialize in the harsh fluorescent lighting. He stared at the janitor. No, not janitor, couldn't be just a janitor, with an expression somewhere between shock and something that looked uncomfortably like fear. His lips moved soundlessly, forming words that wouldn't come. That's not possible," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Lone Eagle is," he trailed off, unable or unwilling to complete the sentence. Martinez set her mop carefully against the wall with the same precise movements she'd used to clean. She straightened, and somehow the motion transformed her. The hunched, invisible custodian evaporated, replaced by something else entirely. A straight spine, squared shoulders, the bearing of someone who'd once commanded a multi-million-dollar fighter jet at twice the speed of sound. She pulled off her cap, and the gray ponytail fell past her shoulders. Her face, weathered and lined, held the kind of calm that came only from having stared death in the face and walked away. "Isla Martinez," she said quietly. "Captain, retired. Service number 2738169. Fighter Squadron 87, then VFA 111, then the Weapons School, 3 carrier deployments, 211 combat missions. She recited it without pride or bitterness, just facts, the way you'd read ingredients from a box. Keller bent slowly, mechanically, to retrieve his tablet. His hands were shaking. He'd been a lieutenant commander in 2003, assigned to the Carl Vinson Battle Group during Operation Iraqi Freedom. He'd been in the carrier's Combat Information Center when the radio transmissions came through, the ones that became legend, that were still discussed in hushed tones at tailhook conventions and Pensacola training sessions. The mission over Tikrit that went sideways. The Sam Trap. The name everyone remembered. "You went down," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I came back up," Martinez replied. There was no drama in her voice, no movie hero bravado, just a statement of fact as simple and profound as sunrise. The Admiral's mind was racing, pulling fragments of memory from 22 years ago. The intelligence reports, the search and rescue operations that lasted 5 days, the CIA debriefs that were still classified, the medal ceremony at the White House that he'd watched on a berthing compartment television screen, envying the newly promoted Captain Martinez standing ramrod straight while the president draped the Navy Cross around her neck. She'd been the first woman to receive it in combat since World War II. "What are you doing here?" The question came out harsher than he'd intended, accusatory almost. "Mopping floors. You were one of the best stick-and-rudder pilots in the fleet." Martinez picked up her mop again but didn't resume cleaning. She studied the strands of cotton like they contained answers. "I retired 12 years ago. Full pension. Medical discharge after the 3rd surgery on my back. Ejection injuries finally caught up." She gestured vaguely at her spine. "The VA hospital bills don't pay themselves. Neither does raising a kid alone when your husband decides he prefers whiskey to family." Keller felt like he'd been punched. The woman who'd evaded 4 enemy fighters while nursing a crippled jet back to friendly territory, who'd provided close air support that saved an entire Marine company from being overrun, who'd been profiled in Time magazine. That woman was here, at 0:30, cleaning floors because she needed the money. The Admiral's jaw clenched, working through thoughts he couldn't quite voice. The corridor suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier with the weight of all the things that got broken in service and never properly fixed. Martinez watched him processing it, her expression unreadable. She'd learned a long time ago that pity was worse than invisibility, and she could see the former starting to cloud his features. "Don't," she said quietly before he could speak. "I'm not a charity case, Admiral." Commander James Nakamura arrived at 4:45, coffee in hand and flight suit already on. He was leading the Red Air Aggressor Squadron for today's exercises, and his reputation for ruthless tactical creativity made him the perfect adversary for the Blue Force pilots who needed their egos checked. He found Admiral Keller standing motionless in the hallway, staring at nothing, while a janitor cleaned methodically nearby. "Sir," Nakamura said, confused by the strange tableau, "the brief starts in 15 minutes. You okay?" Keller seemed to snap out of whatever trance had gripped him. He looked at Nakamura, then back at Martinez, who'd returned to her mopping as if the previous conversation had never happened. The Admiral's mind was clearly working overtime, gears turning behind his eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried a strange intensity. "Jim, that F-18F that went Hangar Queen status last month, the one maintenance tagged for non-critical electrical issues, is it actually unflyable?" Nakamura blinked at the non-sequitur. "The November Charlie 201, no sir, it's safe. Just annoying gremlins in the mission computer and some cockpit lighting. We pulled it from the rotation because we had enough birds for the exercise." "Why?" "Get it flight ready. Full pre-flight, full fuel load, full sim weapons package. I want it on the line in 2 hours." "Sir, we're already at sortie cap for the exercise," Wing Coordination said. "I don't care what Wing Coordination said," Keller interrupted, his command voice brooking no argument. "Get that bird ready, and find me a flight suit. Women's medium may be small. Also a helmet, survival gear, the works. He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, pull the guest pilot insurance paperwork too. Nakamura's confusion was evident. We're adding a pilot, sir. With all respect, the air tasking order is locked. Every slot is filled. And we don't have any female aviators on the roster for today. You do now. Keller's voice was firm, decided. He turned to fully face Martinez, who'd stopped pretending to mop and was watching the exchange with guarded eyes. Captain Martinez, when was the last time you were in a cockpit? She straightened slowly, the mop handle gripped like a weapon. About 3 years. Civilian sightseeing outfit in Virginia Beach needed someone qualified to ferry a vintage Mustang to an air show. Paid $1,000. Her expression was carefully neutral, but something flickered in those gray eyes, something that might have been hunger. Why? Because, the Admiral said, and now there was something almost reckless in his smile. Operation Windfall needs a red air pilot who can show these nuggets what real aerial combat looks like. And because I think you've mopped enough floors, Captain. The silence that followed was electric. Martinez stared at Keller like he'd suggested she sprout wings and fly to the moon without a jet. Nakamura looked between them, completely lost, his coffee forgotten and cooling in his hand. You're serious, Martinez said finally. It wasn't quite a question. Dead serious. You're still current on your physical, aren't you? Retired with medical doesn't mean permanent grounding if the underlying issues are stable. I haven't flown a Hornet in over a decade, Admiral. The cockpit's different now, systems upgraded. But the physics haven't changed. The sky's still the sky, and muscle memory doesn't forget. Keller stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. I need someone to humble some overconfident Blue Force pilots who think they're God's gift to naval aviation. Someone who can think 3 moves ahead, who understands that dogfighting isn't about the jet, it's about the mind behind the stick. The words hung between them like a challenge and an invitation combined. Martinez's fingers tightened on the mop handle, knuckles going white. For a long moment, she was silent, and Keller could see the war happening behind her eyes. The practical part, the part that had accepted invisibility as survival, wrestling with something else, something older and fiercer that had never quite died despite the surgeries and the bills and the years of being forgotten. My daughter, she said finally, her voice rough. She's 16. I have to pick her up from school at. I'll have my aide handle it, Keller said immediately. She'll be picked up, taken wherever she needs to go, with full explanation that her mother is doing important work for the Navy. One day, Captain, just give me today. Martinez looked down at her coveralls, at the institutional mop bucket, at the reflection of herself in the polished floor. Then she looked up, and when she met Keller's gaze, her eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. All right, she said quietly, but I want my old helmet, the one with the eagle decal. It's in storage Unit 743 at the facility off base, has been for 12 years. Keller's smile widened into a genuine grin. Nakamura, you heard the lady. Get that flight suit and make a supply run. And Jim, he paused for emphasis. Not a word to anyone about who she is. Let's keep our new Red Air asset a surprise. Martinez abandoned her mop bucket in the corridor and followed the 2 officers toward the ready room. With each step, something imperceptible shifted in her bearing. By the time they reached the door, the janitor was gone entirely, replaced by the ghost of the pilot she'd been, returning from exile. The ready room at 600 was controlled chaos. 14 pilots from various squadrons crowded the space, some reviewing kneeboard cards, others engaged in the ritual of pre-flight posturing. They were good. Keller could see that in their confidence, their easy camaraderie. They were also comfortable, which made them predictable. That was the problem. Lieutenant Bradley, Raptor Jensen, was holding court near the coffee station, regaling 3 younger pilots with a story about a gun's kill he'd scored on an aggressor in last month's red flag exercise. He was 29, athletic, with the kind of magazine-ready good looks that got him featured in recruiting materials. More importantly, he was genuinely talented, top graduate from his fighter weapons school class, already selected for department head despite being junior in rank. He was also insufferably cocky. "So I pull into lag pursuit," Jensen was saying, hands miming aircraft movements, snap to pure, walk the pipper right onto him, and smoke check him at 800 feet. Game over. Aggressor was so embarrassed he tried to respawn and claim a systems malfunction. The other pilots laughed appreciatively. Keller watched from the doorway as Martinez entered behind him, now wearing a borrowed flight suit that was slightly too large, helmet bag slung over one shoulder. She'd pulled her hair into a tight bun, and without the custodian disguise, her face showed the lean, sharp features of someone who kept themselves in shape despite age and injury. Still, to these pilots, she was just another person, probably admin or support staff. Jensen glanced at her dismissively, then did a double take when he registered the flight suit. His expression cycled through confusion, condescension, and finally amusement. "Ma'am, I think maintenance berthing is in the next building over. That flight suit's a little big for you anyway." A few scattered chuckles rippled through the room. Martinez said nothing, just moved to an empty chair in the corner and began methodically checking her survival vest. Her movements were practiced, automatic, removing items, inspecting them, replacing them in specific locations. The pilots mostly ignored her, returning to their conversations. Nakamura entered carrying a flight helmet that looked ancient by modern standards. The shell was faded, covered in scratches and dings that spoke of countless flight hours. But on both sides, meticulously painted, was an eagle in flight, wings spread, talons extended, rendered in stunning detail. Below it, in sharp black letters, "Lone Eagle." The room didn't go silent all at once. It was gradual, like a wave, as pilots caught sight of the helmet and the call sign, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Jensen's smile faltered. The older pilots, the ones who'd been around long enough to know the stories, went very still. One of them, a commander named Victoria Hayes, actually stood up, her face pale. "Is that—" Hayes couldn't seem to finish the question. Martinez took the helmet from Nakamura without ceremony. She inspected it carefully, fingers tracing the eagle, checking the visor seals, testing the comm connections. Satisfied, she set it on the table in front of her and finally looked up at the room full of starring pilots. "Captain Isla Martinez," she said calmly, "I'll be flying Red Air today. Aggressor package. My mission is to kill as many of you as possible before you reach your target coordinates. Questions?" The silence was absolute now, heavy with recognition and disbelief. Jensen's face had gone from cocky to something approaching terrified. Hayes moved forward slowly, like approaching a myth made flesh. "Ma'am," Hayes said, her voice reverent, "I wrote my fighter weapons school thesis on the Tikrit engagement, on your tactics, we all thought you'd." She trailed off, unable to articulate what everyone had assumed, that legends didn't mop floors. Martinez's expression remained neutral, but something flickered there, a recognition of the cognitive dissonance she was causing. "I retired. Life happened. But today I'm back in the saddle and you're all targets." The brief that followed was professional, detailed, and increasingly tense. Keller explained the exercise parameters. Martinez would launch 30 minutes before the Blue Force strike package, playing the role of an enemy fighter that had evaded the initial fighter sweep. She'd have complete tactical freedom to engage however she chose. The Blue Force would need to simultaneously defend against her, maintain package integrity, and successfully prosecute their simulated targets. Standard exercise rules applied. Visual merge required before simulated weapons employment. Specific altitude floors for safety, knock-it-off procedures if things got dangerous. "This isn't about embarrassing anyone," Keller said, though his eyes suggested otherwise. "It's about pressure testing your coordination under unexpected threat. Captain Martinez is an extremely capable pilot. She will exploit every mistake. Learn from it. Jensen raised his hand, his earlier confidence replaced by something more calculating. Sir, with respect, Captain Martinez hasn't flown operational aircraft in years. Are we adjusting the exercise difficulty parameters to account for that? It was a fair question posed with just enough edge to make it disrespectful. Martinez didn't react visibly, but Keller noticed her jaw tighten fractionally. Before he could respond, she spoke. Lieutenant, when you've survived an SA-6 missile trap, evaded 4 MiGs while flying on one engine, and kept a battle-damaged jet airborne long enough to save Marines from being overrun, then we can discuss difficulty adjustments. Until then, worry about keeping your own situational awareness up, because I promise you, I won't. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jensen flushed red but said nothing. The other pilots exchanged glances, some impressed, others apprehensive. They were beginning to understand that this wasn't going to be a feel-good publicity stunt. This was going to hurt. As the brief concluded and pilots began filing out toward the flight line, Keller pulled Martinez aside. "You didn't have to verbally execute him," he said quietly, though there was approval in his tone. "Yes, I did," Martinez replied, watching the pilots leave. "They need to take this seriously or someone gets hurt. Complacency kills, Admiral, you know that. Besides," she added with the ghost of a smile, "it felt good." The morning sun was climbing as Martinez walked the flight line toward her assigned jet, helmet bag swinging at her side. The Super Hornet, designated November, sat gleaming in the early light, its twin tails casting long shadows across the tarmac. Ground crew swarmed around it, completing final checks, loading simulated weapons pods, filling fuel tanks. The familiar smell of JP-5, jet fuel and hydraulic fluid, hit her like a physical thing, a scent she hadn't realized she'd missed with an almost painful intensity. The plane captain, a young petty officer named Rodriguez, looked uncertain as she approached. "Ma'am, I've got your bird ready, but, I need to ask. When's the last time you flew a Rhino specifically? The systems are different from the Legacy Hornet, I know," Martinez finished for him. She ran her hand along the fuselage, fingers trailing over the cool metal. APG-79 AESA radar instead of the old mechanically scanned array. Better avionics integration, improved sensor fusion, more thrust. But the basic airframe, the way she feels in the air, that's the same. That doesn't change. Rodriguez still looked dubious but nodded. Martinez began her walk-around inspection, and the ground crew watched in growing surprise as she moved with absolute confidence, checking every panel, every seam, every access point with practiced efficiency. This wasn't someone refamiliarizing themselves. This was someone who'd inspected thousands of aircraft and could do it blind. Her hands knew where to check for hydraulic leaks, how to test control surface play, which panels needed extra scrutiny. "Weapons load?" she asked. "All ACMI pods, ma'am. Air combat maneuvering instrumentation. Simulated AIM-9X and AIM-120 missiles, guns tracking active. Everything's telemetry, no live ordnance." Martinez nodded, completing her inspection. She climbed the boarding ladder with fluid movements despite her age, despite the back injuries that had ended her career. Settling into the ejection seat felt like coming home and opening an old wound simultaneously. The cockpit smelled of hot electronics, and that distinctive new car scent that military aircraft somehow maintained despite decades of hard use. Her hands moved across the controls with remembered precision, straps secured, harness locked, helmet on, visor down, oxygen flow checked. The muscle memory was there, buried but not gone. She powered up the aircraft systems, and the cockpit came alive around her with displays and readouts. The modern glass cockpit was indeed different from what she'd flown, but not incomprehensibly so. Pilots adapted. That's what they did. "Lone Eagle, this is Ocean Ground, radio check." The tower controller's voice crackled through her helmet speakers. "Ocean Ground, Lone Eagle reads you 5x5. Her voice was steady, professional, as if 12 years hadn't passed since she'd last used that call sign in operational context, as if saying those words hadn't just sent electricity through her entire nervous system. Copy Lone Eagle. You're cleared to taxi runway 23. Winds 220 at 8 knots. Altimeter 3008. Your departure window is in 12 minutes. Lone Eagle copies, taxiing 23. The twin F414 engine spooled up with a rising whine that she felt in her bones. The jet trembled beneath her, eager, powerful, contained violence waiting to be released. Martinez nudged the throttles forward and the Super Hornet began rolling. The ground crew snapped salutes as she passed. Through her canopy, she could see other pilots gathering near their own aircraft, watching her taxi out. Word had clearly spread. The legend was flying again. At the runway threshold, she ran through final checks with the same methodical precision she'd taught to countless Nugget pilots back when she'd been a weapons school instructor. Everything green, everything nominal. The controller cleared her for takeoff, and Martinez advanced the throttles smoothly to military power, then into afterburner. The acceleration slammed her back into the seat, physics and thrust, and the raw mechanical fury of 44,000 pounds of force turning jet fuel into velocity. The Hornet leaped off the runway like it had been catapulted, and suddenly Martinez was airborne, climbing hard through clear Virginia sky. The world fell away beneath her, buildings, roads, the miniature layout of the naval station shrinking to insignificance. She retracted the landing gear, felt the satisfying thunk of the wheels locking up, and continued her climb. The jet handled beautifully, responsive but stable, answering every input with precision. At 15,000 feet, she leveled off and began her transit toward the exercise airspace over the Atlantic. The radio chatter was minimal, just her and the controllers, the Blue Force package still on the ground going through their own launch procedures. She had 30 minutes alone up here before the fight started. 30 minutes to remember what it felt like to be Lone Eagle instead of just Martinez. She pulled the jet through a barrel roll just to feel it, just to verify that her hands and her inner ear still worked together the way they once had. The horizon spun around her, blue ocean, white clouds, darker blue sky, then back to level flight. Clean, smooth, perfect. Yeah, she muttered to herself inside the helmet, I still got it. The exercise airspace was a designated box of sky 50 miles off the Virginia coast, big enough for aircraft to maneuver but defined enough to keep the chaos contained. Martinez orbited at 25,000 feet, running through her tactical plan. She'd studied the Blue Force package composition during the brief. 8 aircraft total, divided into 2 4-ship divisions. Flight lead was Commander Hayes, the woman who'd written her thesis on Martinez's combat tactics. The irony wasn't lost on her. They'd be coming in low, probably 500 feet above the water, trying to stay under radar coverage until the last possible moment before popping up to engage their simulated targets, a pair of ship silhouettes positioned in the exercise area. Standard strike profile. Predictable, which meant exploitable. Martinez consulted her kneeboard card, checking frequencies and codes. Her AESA radar was in standby, not actively searching. If she lit them up too early, they'd know she was here and adjust. Better to stay quiet, use eyeballs and the ACMI pod's passive sensors to locate them first. The pods would track everything, recording the entire engagement for debrief. Every mistake, every victory, every moment would be preserved for analysis. Lone Eagle, Ocean a strike, the radio crackled. Hayes's voice professional and focused. Package is airborne, 8 ships proceeding to ingress point Alpha as briefed. Time on target in 20 minutes. Copy strike, Martinez replied. Lone Eagle is established in the area. Come find me. She could hear the smile in Hayes's response. Wilco, strike is hunting. Martinez descended to 15,000 feet, positioning herself between the suspected ingress route and the target area. She'd be above them, holding the energy advantage, with the sun at her back. Basic tactics, the kind taught on day one of fighter training, but still effective because physics didn't care about technology. The jet higher and faster held all the cards until the merge. Minutes ticked by. Martinez's eyes scanned the sky systematically, high to low, left to right, never focusing on any one point too long, looking for the glint of sunlight off a canopy, the dark speck that moved wrong against clouds, any visual cue that betrayed an aircraft's position. Modern fighters had incredible sensors, but the Mark I eyeball was still the most reliable threat detector in a visual fight. There, low and fast, maybe 8 miles out, 4 dark shapes skimming the wavetops. The 1st Division. Martinez smiled inside her mask. They were doing exactly what she'd expected, staying low to avoid radar, maintaining tight formation for mutual support, probably feeling confident because they hadn't been intercepted yet. She rolled, inverted, and pulled, converting her altitude into airspeed, descending in a split S that put her behind and above the formation. The G-forces pressed her into the seat, 4GS 5-6, but her anti-G suit inflated and her training held. She grunted through the strain, keeping her vision clear, tracking the blue force through her canopy as she maneuvered. The 2nd Division would be nearby, probably in trail or offset to provide mutual support. Martinez needed to engage fast, score kills, and extend before they could bracket her. Classic hit and run. She armed her simulated weapons, aim 9x first for the opening shot, and settled into firing parameters behind the trailing aircraft in the formation. Raptor Bandit, you're 6 o'clock, 3 miles low. One of Jensen's wingmen had spotted her, the alarm clear in his voice. Too late. Martinez's sidewinder tone growled in her helmet, the seeker head locked on the hot tailpipe of the last F-18 in formation. She pressed the trigger. Fox 2 on the number 4 ship. The ACMI system registered the kill immediately. Knock off, -4 is terminated, the controller's voice announced. 3 aircraft left in this division. The formation broke hard, aircraft scattering like startled birds, everyone trying to deny her another easy shot. Jensen pulled into her, trying to force an overshoot, but Martinez had been expecting it. She pulled her nose up sharply, converting speed into altitude, climbing above his turn circle. For a moment, they were neutral, neither with advantage. But Martinez knew something Jensen didn't yet. She'd been fighting with one eye on her tactical display, tracking the 2nd Division. They were coming fast, trying to sandwich her between 2 groups of fighters. Time to leave. Striker 2 is engaged defensive. Hayes's voice cut through the radio frequency, and Martinez realized with satisfaction that while she'd been occupying one division, the 2nd Division had continued toward the target area. They were prioritizing the mission over supporting their engaged flight. Smart, but it left Jensen's group vulnerable. Martinez extended away from the 1st Division, gaining separation and altitude. Jensen tried to chase but couldn't match her energy state. She'd kept her speed up while his hard turn had bled knots. She checked 6 o'clock, confirmed no one was immediately threatening, and turned her attention back toward the target area where the 2nd Division would be setting up their attack run. Time to introduce herself to Commander Hayes. The 2nd Division had indeed pressed on toward their target, probably assuming Martinez was too busy with the 1st group to threaten them. It was a reasonable assumption and would have been correct against a less experienced aggressor. But Martinez had spent a career making the impossible routine. She put the Super Hornet into a steep dive, trading altitude for airspeed, accelerating past 500 knots. The Atlantic Ocean grew from a distant blue abstraction into a detailed surface of waves and whitecaps. She leveled at 2,000 feet, speed still building, and activated her radar for a brief sweep. 4 contacts, exactly where she'd expected them, setting up for their pop-up attack on the simulated surface targets. Lone Eagle is tracking 4 contacts, Bullseye 270 for 42 miles, she called, using the standardized geographic reference point to describe their position. Professional courtesy, letting everyone know where the fight was happening. Striker 2 has contact, same bullseye, Hayes replied. Two-ship bracket, prepare to engage. Martinez smiled. Hayes was smart, immediately recognizing the threat and organizing her division to counter it. Two aircraft would continue to the target while two turned to engage Martinez. Textbook response to a single aggressor. The problem was that textbook assumed the aggressor was playing by textbook rules. Martinez selected an AIM-120 AMRAAM, simulated medium-range radar-guided missile, and designated the target furthest from her. The geometry was tricky, near the edge of parameters, but the ACMI system would score it as valid if she executed properly. She fired, called Fox 3, and immediately broke hard right, descending back toward the ocean surface. Striker 2-3 is terminated, the controller announced. Another kill. Now Hayes had a choice. Continue with only one wingman to prosecute the target, or abort and focus on dealing with Martinez. Either option was a win from the aggressor perspective. The point of these exercises wasn't just to score kills, it was to disrupt the enemy's ability to accomplish their mission. Striker package press, Hayes ordered. She was pressing on with the mission. Gutsy call, the kind Martinez herself would have made. She felt a flash of respect for the younger pilot. But respect didn't mean mercy. Martinez came screaming back in from their left flank, staying low where the ocean clutter would make radar detection harder. She spotted them visually first, two Hornets climbing to attack altitude, a third maintaining low cover. Hayes was the trailer, protecting the flight, smart positioning. She'd expected Martinez to go for easy kills and positioned herself to counter it. Instead, Martinez pulled vertical, using her superior speed to climb above them all. She inverted at the top, pulled through, and came down like a hawk on the attack aircraft just as they were lining up on target. Another Sidewinder tone, another Fox 2 call, another kill. Striker 2-1 is terminated. That was Hayes's wingman. The mission was falling apart. Hayes reacted instantly, abandoning the target and pulling into Martinez with everything the jet had. The two Super Hornets closed at combined speeds exceeding 1,000 knots, and suddenly they were in the classic merge. That moment where two aircraft flash past each other, and the neutral state instantly becomes a swirling, three-dimensional chess match for position and advantage. Martinez pulled hard, 7 Gs now, the world graying at the edges of her vision. She could feel her back screaming in protest, old injuries awakening, but she forced it down, focused on the fight. Hayes was good, she'd matched Martinez's pull, denying the immediate gun's solution. They circled each other, two predators, neither giving an inch. "This is amazing," Hayes gasped over the radio, strain evident in her voice from the G-loading. "Like fighting a ghost." "Less talking," Martinez grunted back, "more flying." They spiraled downward, both bleeding energy in the turn fight, altitude ticking away. Martinez had the experience advantage, but Hayes had youth and no back injuries to manage. It was a fair fight, which meant Martinez needed to cheat. She deliberately extended out of the turn, appearing to make a mistake, giving Hayes an apparent advantage. Hayes took the bait, pulling hard to get behind Martinez, probably already imagining the gun kill she was about to score on the legendary Lone Eagle. But Martinez had timed it perfectly. As Hayes committed to the pursuit, Martinez deployed her speed brakes, killing her forward velocity in an instant. Hayes shot past, suddenly ahead instead of behind. "Fox 2 on Striker 2 lead," Martinez called, placing a simulated Sidewinder on Hayes's jet. "That's a kill." There was a long pause on the radio. Then Hayes's voice, breathless and filled with something like joy despite the defeat. "Damn, that was beautiful. Striker 2 is terminated. Lone Eagle, you're cleared for RTB. Hell of a fight, ma'am." "Good try, Commander," Martinez replied. "You're a better pilot than I was at your experience level. Keep flying like that, you'll be training the next generation at Fallen." She meant it. Hayes had pushed her harder than she'd expected. A few years ago, that fight would have been over in half the time. Martinez pointed her nose back toward Oceana, checking her fuel state. Plenty for the transit home. The remaining Blue Force aircraft from Jensen's division were still orbiting somewhere in the area, but the exercise had been called off after the Red Air objective, disrupt the strike package, had been decisively achieved. All told, she'd scored 5 kills against 8 aircraft without taking a loss. Not bad for someone who'd been mopping floors 6 hours earlier. As she flew, alone again in the clean morning sky, Martinez felt something unfamiliar and almost forgotten stirring in her chest. She recognized it eventually. It was pride. The quiet kind that didn't need validation or medals or recognition. Just the knowledge that when it counted, when she'd been tested against the best the modern Navy could field, she'd proven she still belonged here in the sky. The Super Hornet hummed beneath her, and for 20 peaceful minutes, Captain Isla Martinez was exactly who she'd always been meant to be. Landing was smooth, a carrier-trained habit that made her grease the touchdown despite being on a runway with thousands of feet of concrete instead of a moving deck with 4 wires to catch. Martinez taxied back to the line, where ground crew waited to marshal her in. As she shut down the engines and the cockpit cooled in the sudden silence, she saw that a small crowd had gathered. Pilots, maintenance personnel, even some base personnel who'd somehow heard what had happened. They weren't applauding. This was a military installation, not an air show. But there was something in their attention, the way they watched her climb down from the jet, that felt like a kind of acknowledgement. Martinez removed her helmet, tucked it under her arm, and walked across the tarmac toward the ready room. The crowd parted naturally to let her through. Inside, the debrief was already underway. Admiral Keller stood at the front of the room, where a large display showed the ACMI tape, the digital recording of every aircraft's position, every maneuver, every kill throughout the exercise. The Blue Force pilots sat in chairs looking variously thoughtful, impressed, or deflated. Jensen was in the back, arms crossed, his earlier cockiness replaced with something harder to read. Keller gestured for Martinez to join him at the front. "Gentlemen, ladies, I believe we've all learned something today. Captain Martinez, walk us through your tactical plan." For the next 45 minutes, Martinez did exactly that. She talked about energy management, about exploiting predictable tactics, about the importance of maintaining situational awareness not just in your immediate vicinity, but across the entire tactical picture. She was honest about the moments where she'd been vulnerable, where a different decision by the Blue Force might have changed the outcome. This wasn't about ego, it was about learning. Hayes asked intelligent questions about the split-S entry and the timing of the speed brake deployment. Other pilots took notes, their initial skepticism replaced by genuine interest. Even Jensen eventually raised his hand and asked about altitude management in the vertical fight. Martinez answered without condescension, treating him like the skilled pilot he was despite his earlier dismissiveness. "The key thing to understand," Martinez said as the debrief wound down, "is that 90% of air combat happens before anyone sees anyone else. It's planning, preparation, understanding your enemy's probable courses of action. The actual fighting, the cool stuff you see in movies, that's just execution of decisions already made. You all are excellent pilots with great hands, but today I had better information and used it more efficiently. That's the gap you need to close." Keller nodded approvingly. "Which is exactly why we run these exercises, to find our gaps before they get people killed in actual combat." He paused, looking around the room. "I'm adding Captain Martinez to the Oceana training cadre as a civilian contract instructor, effective immediately. She'll be running adversary tactics courses monthly for the next year. Anyone who wants to learn from someone who's actually done this for real, not just in peacetime exercises, has that opportunity now." The announcement surprised Martinez. Keller hadn't mentioned anything about this beforehand, but she kept her face neutral. A contract instructor position would pay significantly better than custodial work, and it was flying, actual flying, not just watching from the ground. The speed with which her life had just changed was dizzying. As the pilots filed out, several approached Martinez with handshakes and genuine thanks. Hayes lingered. "Ma'am, I meant what I said about my thesis. The Tikrit engagement, the way you held off those MiGs while coordinating close air support. I've studied that mission probably 100 times. Can I ask, what was it really like? The unclassified version, I mean." Martinez was quiet for a moment, remembering. The fear, the adrenaline, the impossible calculations made in split seconds while surface-to-air missiles filled the sky and enemy fighters closed from multiple directions. The Marines on the ground, surrounded, their voices on the radio mixing with the missile warning tones and the cockpit alarms. The decision to stay when every instinct screamed to run. "It was terrifying," she said honestly. "And the scariest part wasn't the missiles or the MiGs. It was knowing that if I failed, if I made one wrong choice, people died. Young kids, same age as you, on the ground with no way out except me. That weight, that's what I remember most. Not the excitement or the glory. The weight." Hayes nodded slowly, processing that. "Thank you for staying, ma'am, for them back then, and for coming back today for us." After Hayes left, only Keller remained. He was reviewing something on his tablet, probably already composing the message traffic that would formalize Martinez's new position. He looked up as she approached. "You didn't have to do this," Martinez said quietly. "The instructor position, I would have been fine with." "No," Keller interrupted firmly. "You wouldn't have been fine, and more importantly, the fleet wouldn't have been fine. We almost lost you, lost what you know, what you've learned through blood and experience, to budget cuts and bureaucratic short-sightedness, and the thousand small ways we fail our people after they've given everything." His voice carried frustration, anger even, not directed at her but at the system. "I can't fix all of it. Can't fix the VA wait times or the retirement pay calculations or any of the other ways we broke our promises. But I can fix this. I can make sure that when pilots are learning to fight, they're learning from someone who actually has. Someone who survived and can teach others to do the same." Martinez felt something in her throat, hot and tight. She'd become very good at not crying over the past decade, at maintaining the stoic shell that let her survive the indignity of invisibility. But Keller's words, the raw honesty in them, threatened to crack that shell. "Thank you, Admiral," she managed, "for seeing me, for remembering." "Captain Martinez," Keller said, and his voice was gentle now. "Some call signs stick because they're funny or because of some embarrassing incident. But yours, Lone Eagle, that stuck because of who you are. One pilot alone against impossible odds and you won. That doesn't fade. That doesn't get erased by time or circumstances or anything else. I didn't remember you today. I've never forgotten. None of us have, we just forgot to look." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and missed opportunities, and the simple, profound relief of being recognized after years of invisibility. Martinez nodded, not trusting herself to speak further, and turned to leave. "Captain," Keller called after her, "one more thing, your daughter, what's her name?" Myra Elena Martinez. She's 16. "Does she know about what you did, who you were?" Martinez paused at the door. "I've told her stories, shown her some photos, but I don't think she really understands. She sees me as what I've been, not what I was." Keller smiled. "Bring her to the next monthly training session. Let her see her mother in a flight suit instead of coveralls. Let her watch you teach. Kids need to know their parents are heroes, Captain, especially daughters." Martinez left the ready room, helmet bag in hand, walking through the same corridor she'd mopped hours earlier. But the space felt different now, or maybe she felt different in it. The invisible woman who'd pushed a mop through pre-dawn silence was gone, replaced by someone who existed again in full color and dimension. She found her car in the civilian parking area, an old Honda with a temperamental starter and a crack in the windshield. Before getting in, she pulled out her phone and called her daughter's number. It rang 3 times before Myra picked up. "Mom, everything okay? The Navy called the school and said you were doing some important work thing. What's going on?" Martinez looked back toward the flight line, where the jets sat in neat rows, ready for the next mission, the next training flight, the next moment of testing human skill against physics and fate. "Myra," she said, "I need to tell you a story. A real one about your mom, about who I was before you were born. And then I need to tell you what happened today. Can you listen?" "Yeah, Mom, I'm listening." Martinez leaned against her car in the morning sun and began to talk. She told her daughter about a young pilot fresh out of flight school, scared but determined, about learning to land on aircraft carriers in the middle of the ocean, about deployments to distant seas and the camaraderie of ready rooms and the terror and exhilaration of flight, about a mission over Iraq when everything went wrong and somehow went right, about a call sign earned through fire. She talked for nearly an hour, and Myra listened without interrupting. And when Martinez finally finished with today's events, the Admiral, the flight, the impossible resurrection of a life thought permanently grounded, her daughter was crying on the other end of the phone. "Mom," Myra said, voice thick with emotion, "why didn't you tell me all this before? Why did you let me think you were just a janitor?" Martinez finished gently. "Because I was, sweetie, I am. That's honest work, nothing shameful in it. But you're right, I should have told you more. Should have made sure you knew that your mom was other things too, once upon a time. I think I forgot, somewhere along the way. Forgot that the past matters even when the present is hard." "Are you going to keep flying now?" "Once a month, teaching. And Myra, Admiral Keller suggested you might want to come watch sometime. See what your mom does when she's doing the thing she loves most." "Yes," Myra's response was immediate, fierce. "Yes, I want to see that. I want to see you fly." Martinez smiled, and it felt like the first real smile in years. "Okay then. Next month. I'll bring you on base, show you around, introduce you to some of the best pilots in the world. And then you can watch your mom remind them that good doesn't mean unbeatable." They talked for a while longer about smaller things, about dinner plans and Myra's homework and the mundane fabric of their daily lives. But underneath it all, something fundamental had shifted. Martinez had spent 12 years trying to protect her daughter from disappointment by minimizing her own past accomplishments, believing that invisible mothers were safer than fallen ones. She'd been wrong. Children didn't need perfect parents. They needed honest ones. When she finally hung up and started the temperamental Honda, Martinez felt lighter than she had in a decade. The engine caught on the third try, sputtering to life, and she drove away from Naval Air Station Oceana not as a custodian clocking out, but as a pilot heading home after a good flight. Behind her on the flight line, her assigned Super Hornet was already being refueled and prepped for the afternoon training sessions. Someone had placed a small placard on the canopy rail, "Reserved for Lone Eagle." The ground crew chief, Rodriguez, had made it himself during lunch, painted with careful precision. It wasn't official or authorized, but no one was going to take it down. 1 month later, Martinez returned to Oceana for her first official training session as a civilian contract instructor. She arrived early, as was her habit, and found that word of the legend back from the dead had spread far beyond the initial group of pilots. The ready room was packed, not just with the scheduled students but with pilots from other squadrons, even a few from other branches who'd heard stories and wanted to see for themselves. Myra sat in the back, wide-eyed, wearing visitor credentials on a lanyard around her neck. She dressed carefully for the occasion, jeans and a neat blouse, her dark hair pulled back the way her mother wore it. Martinez caught her eye and smiled before turning her attention to the roomful of aviators. "Good morning," Martinez began, and the room fell silent. "For those who don't know me, I'm Captain Isla Martinez, call sign Lone Eagle. I flew Hornets and Super Hornets for 16 years before medical retirement. Today we're going to talk about close-quarters aerial combat, but more specifically, we're going to talk about how to survive when everything goes wrong." She clicked through to a tactical diagram on the screen. "Tikrit, Iraq, March 2003. I was part of a two-ship providing close air support for a Marine reconnaissance unit that had been ambushed and surrounded. Enemy fighters inbound from the north, SAM batteries active, weather deteriorating, and my wingman took AAA fire that forced him to return to the carrier with battle damage. So there I was. One jet, low fuel, multiple threats, and Marines on the ground counting on me to keep them alive long enough for the rescue birds to arrive. Martinez walked through the tactical situation methodically. No drama, just facts. The decisions made in split seconds. The calculations of risk versus necessity. The moment when the SA-6 missile locked on and she had to choose between defensive maneuvers that would break her attack run or pressing through and trusting her countermeasures. She'd chosen to press, and the Marine Company had survived. She'd taken battle damage, caught one MiG in a low-altitude scissors fight she had no business winning, and evaded 3 others long enough for Navy fighters to arrive and even the odds. The point, Martinez said, bringing the presentation back to present tense, isn't that I'm some kind of superhero. I'm not. I was terrified, made mistakes, got lucky in places where skill alone wouldn't have been enough. The point is that when circumstances force you into impossible positions, you don't give up. You assess, you adapt, you execute. Fear is acceptable. Paralysis is not. For the next 3 hours, Martinez put them through tactical scenarios, forced them to make decisions with incomplete information and competing priorities. She was demanding but fair, pushing them to their mental limits while explaining the reasoning behind correct choices. When someone made a good call, she acknowledged it. When they made a poor one, she explained why without crushing them. During a break, several pilots surrounded her with questions. Hayes was there, now sporting her own instructor credentials. Jensen approached more hesitantly, but Martinez greeted him without any reference to their initial contentious encounter. He'd proven himself a good pilot and a quick learner in the month since that first exercise. The cockiness had been tempered into confidence, which was the entire point of training. "Ma'am," Jensen said, "I wanted to apologize for—" "Don't," Martinez interrupted gently. "You didn't know, and even if you had, skepticism is healthy. Actions prove worth, not reputation. You flew well in the follow-up exercises. That's what matters. But I was disrespectful, to you, to your service. Lieutenant, I was mopping floors. Your initial assessment wasn't illogical given the limited information available. That's actually a decent operational mindset. Trust what you can verify, question what seems inconsistent. Just apply that same standard to everyone, including yourself, and you'll do fine." At the end of the day, after the pilots had filtered out and the ready room had emptied, Myra approached her mother. She'd been quiet all day, observing, processing. Now she looked at Martinez with something like awe. "Mom," Myra said carefully, "all those times you told me to work hard, to not give up when things got difficult, to be brave, were you talking about this? About what you did?" Martinez considered the question. Partly, but also about what came after, about getting up every day when your back hurts and the bills are due and nobody sees you or values what you've done. That takes a different kind of courage, Myra. The kind that doesn't get medals or recognition. The kind that just keeps going because that's what you do. But this, Myra gestured at the ready room, the flight line visible through the windows, the world her mother inhabited with such natural authority. "This is amazing. You're amazing. Why did you hide it?" "I didn't hide it intentionally. I just forgot to remember it mattered. Got so focused on survival, on providing for you, on making it through each day, that I forgot I was allowed to be proud of what I'd accomplished. That was a mistake, baby. Don't ever make that mistake." They stood together at the window, watching the afternoon training flights launching, the jets climbing into perfect blue sky trailing vapor. Martinez put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, and for once, she let herself fully inhabit both identities, the veteran pilot and the struggling single mother, the decorated warrior and the invisible custodian, all the pieces that made up the complicated whole of who she was. "Come on," Martinez said. "Let's go home. I'll make dinner, you can tell me about your day at school, and we'll be normal for a while." Mom, Myra said as they walked toward the parking lot, I don't think we're ever going to be normal again. I think normal is overrated anyway. Martinez laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine. You know what? You might be right about that. 3 months into the training contract, Admiral Keller called Martinez into his office. She arrived in civilian clothes, jeans and a blazer, the compromise outfit she developed for the instructor role that balanced professionalism with the reality that she wasn't active duty anymore. Keller gestured to a chair across from his desk, and his expression was unreadable. Captain Martinez, he began formally, which immediately put her on guard. I have a proposition that I need you to seriously consider, and I want you to know you can say no without any repercussions to your current contract. Sir, you're worrying me. Keller pulled out a folder, official Navy documents with multiple tabs and colored endorsement sheets. The fighter weapons school at Fallen is standing up a new curriculum track focused on single-pilot decision-making under crisis conditions. They want to build it around historical case studies and real-world experience, not just theoretical scenarios. Your name came up repeatedly, actually, as the ideal candidate to develop and teach this curriculum. Martinez stared at him. Sir, I'm 56 years old with a medical retirement. I can't return to active duty even if I wanted to. Not active duty. Civilian technical advisor to the weapons school. It's a permanent position, GS-14 equivalent salary, full benefits, relocation assistance to Nevada. You be teaching the Navy's best aviators, the ones who will themselves become instructors, squadron commanders, carrier air wing commanders. Your influence would extend to thousands of pilots over the next decade or more. The magnitude of the offer slowly sank in. The fighter weapons school, Top Gun in common parlance, was the apex of naval aviation. To teach there, even as a civilian, was an honor that few received. But it was also in Nevada, which meant leaving Virginia, uprooting Myra in her junior year of high school, abandoning the small stability they'd built. I have a daughter, Martinez said slowly. She's finally settled in school, has friends, is doing well. I can't just... I know, Keller said gently, which is why I made some calls. Fallen High School has an excellent academic program and a surprising number of students from military families who understand transition. The base has family support resources. And, he added with a slight smile, the position comes with enough salary that you could actually afford to live comfortably for the first time in years, maybe even save for Myra's college. Martinez closed her eyes, feeling the pull of two opposing forces. The practical part of her, the part that had learned to be small and invisible and safe, screamed to decline. Don't disrupt what's working. Don't reach for more when you've finally got enough. But the other part, the part that had flown against impossible odds, that had just spent 3 months remembering what it felt like to be valued for her skills, that part whispered differently. Can I have time to think about it, to talk to Myra? Take a week. But Captain, for what it's worth, I think you've spent enough of your life making yourself smaller so others could be comfortable. This is a chance to be exactly as large as your competence actually deserves. Don't shrink from it. That evening, Martinez sat Myra down and explained the offer. She was prepared for resistance, for teenage anger at being uprooted, for the completely reasonable selfishness of a 16-year-old who didn't want to leave her established life. What she got instead was thoughtful silence, then a question that caught her completely off guard. Mom, if I wasn't a factor, if I was already graduated or didn't exist, would you want this job? Martinez opened her mouth to deflect, then stopped. Honesty. That's what they'd promised each other after the revelation of her past. Yes, she admitted. I would. It's everything I thought I'd lost forever. A chance to do meaningful work at the highest level, to shape the future of naval aviation, to be valued for what I know rather than tolerated for what I can clean. Myra nodded slowly. Then we should go. I'll miss my friends, but we can stay in touch online. And Mom, you've spent my whole life putting me first. Maybe it's okay to put yourself first for once. Maybe I need to see that, See what it looks like when you don't just survive but actually thrive. When did you get so wise? Martinez asked, her voice rough. I had a good teacher, Myra replied. She just forgot to teach herself the same lessons. So Martinez accepted the position. The next 2 months were a chaos of logistics, packing up their small apartment, arranging movers, transferring Myra's school records, driving cross-country with everything they owned crammed into a rental truck. Martinez reported to Naval Air Station Fallon in Nevada on a clear September morning, Myra beside her, both of them exhausted and exhilarated and terrified in equal measure. The fighter weapons school was everything she'd remembered and more. The pilots here were the elite of the elite, hand-picked from fleet squadrons, already incredibly skilled. Teaching them required a different approach than the monthly sessions at Oceana. These aviators didn't need basic competency training. They needed edge cases, crisis scenarios, the kind of hard-won wisdom that only came from actually living through the nightmare situations that training usually only simulated. Martinez developed her curriculum methodically over the following months. She interviewed other combat veterans, studied after-action reports from recent conflicts, incorporated lessons from non-aviation crisis management fields. The core remained her own experience, but she broadened it, made it universal. The course she created wasn't just about dogfighting or tactical employment. It was about decision-making under extreme stress, about maintaining cognitive function when every instinct screamed panic, about leadership when you were alone and help was far away. The first class of students approached her course with curiosity mixed with skepticism. By the end of the first week, skepticism had transformed into respect. By graduation, several students told her it was the most valuable training they'd received in their entire careers. The feedback made its way up the chain, and soon other services were asking if their pilots could attend. The curriculum Martinez had developed became a model, eventually adopted across joint service training programs.